I grew up as the forgotten son in my family. From my earliest memories, it was clear my sister Jessica was the golden child while I was just an afterthought. Thankfully, my grandparents always saw me differently. They valued me when my parents couldn't, and their estate was substantial. I never expected anything from them, which made it all the more shocking when I discovered my parents scheming to redirect my inheritance to Jessica. What they never realized was that my grandparents were much smarter than anyone gave them credit for. Before I dive into how my family nearly tore itself apart over money, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Also, if you have ever dealt with family favoritism, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family drama. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, my childhood looked normal from the outside. My parents, Thomas and Eleanor, provided a comfortable middle-class life for my sister Jessica and me. On paper, we had everything we needed, but beneath the surface ran an undercurrent of inequity that shaped my entire existence. Jessica was 3 years younger than me, but from the moment she was born, she became the center of our family universe. She was naturally gifted, excelling in school, without much effort and showing talent in every sport she tried. I was average by comparison, working hard for my B+ grades, and making the soccer team through determination rather than natural ability. The walls of our family home told the story clearly. The hallway displayed Jessica's spelling bee trophies, swimming medals, and perfect attendance certificates. My modest soccer trophies were relegated to a shelf in my bedroom, rarely acknowledged by anyone except me. When visitors came, my parents proudly guided them to Jessica's accomplishments, enthusiastically narrating each achievement, while completely bypassing anything I had done. Birthday celebrations marked the disparity even more painfully. Jessica's parties were elaborate affairs with professional decorations, catered food, and dozens of invited guests. My mother would spend weeks planning every detail. For my birthdays, we typically had a simple family dinner, maybe with one friend invited. The excuse was always that boys did not care about parties as much as girls did. But the message was clear: her milestones were worth celebrating. Mine were merely obligatory. The pattern extended to school events and activities. My parents never missed a single one of Jessica's piano recitals or debate competitions. They would arrive early to get front row seats, cameras ready. Meanwhile, I could count on one hand the number of soccer games they attended throughout my high school years. Usually only one parent would show up, arriving late and leaving early, often missing my rare moments in the spotlight. As I grew older, the emotional distance between my parents and me widened, while their bond with Jessica strengthened. I became increasingly aware of my outsider status within my own family. During dinner conversations, my parents hung on Jessica's every word, while my contributions were met with distracted nods or quick changes of subject. My salvation came in the form of my grandparents, William and Martha. They lived in a beautiful colonial-style home on the outskirts of Portland, and my weekly visits to their estate became my emotional sanctuary. Unlike my parents, my grandparents seemed genuinely interested in who I was and who I might become. My grandfather, William, had built a successful construction company from nothing, eventually expanding into real estate development. During my visits, he would take me into his study, explaining business concepts in ways that my young mind could grasp. He taught me about investments, property values, and the importance of integrity in business dealings. These lessons were delivered not as formal instruction, but through engaging stories from his own life experiences. My grandmother, Martha, was equally invested in my development. She noticed my interest in the architectural magazines my grandfather kept in his study and encouraged this passion. For my 13th birthday, she gave me a professional drafting set and architecture books, tools that my parents dismissed as impractical, but that kindled my future career path. The contrast between my treatment at home and at my grandparents' house could not have been more stark. With my parents, I felt invisible. With my grandparents, I felt valued. At home, my accomplishments were footnotes. With my grandparents, they were celebrated. This dichotomy shaped my understanding of family and self-worth in profound ways. My teenage years only amplified the favoritism. When Jessica graduated high school with honors, my parents gifted her a brand new car, complete with a giant red bow in the driveway, and a professional photographer to capture her surprised reaction. 2 years earlier, when I graduated with nearly identical grades, I received a watch. It was a nice watch, but the imbalance was impossible to ignore. College planning further highlighted the disparity. My parents fully funded Jessica's education at an expensive private university, covering her tuition, housing, and even providing a generous monthly allowance. For me, they offered partial tuition support for a state school, explaining that they simply could not afford more. I worked summer jobs and took out student loans to make up the difference, watching as Jessica posted social media updates about her spring break trips to tropical destinations. Through all of this, my grandparents continued to be my emotional anchor. They could not openly challenge my parents' decisions without causing family conflict, but they offered support in ways they could. My grandfather would slip me money occasionally, calling it an investment in my future. My grandmother would listen to my frustrations without judgment, offering wisdom rather than pity. Despite the clear favoritism, I was determined to build my own path. I channeled my energy into my studies and worked harder than most of my peers. The architecture program was demanding, but I found genuine joy in designing spaces that could potentially improve people's lives. While Jessica seemed to drift through college, enjoying the social scene, I was laying the foundation for a career I was passionate about. By the time I finished college, the patterns were so established that I no longer expected equitable treatment from my parents. I had accepted our family dynamic for what it was, and focused on building a life where I could define my own worth. Little did I know that the most painful family lessons were still ahead, and that my grandparents had been quietly watching everything unfold with a plan of their own. By age 28, I had established myself as an architect at a mid-sized firm in Seattle. The 3-hour distance from Portland provided a healthy buffer from family dynamics, though I still carried substantial student loan debt that my sister never had to worry about. Jessica had settled in our hometown, married a wealthy pharmaceutical sales representative, and taken a cushy position at my father's insurance company. From the outside, she had the perfect life, while I was still struggling to get my financial footing. Everything changed when my grandmother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim from the start, and the rapid decline of this vibrant woman who had been such a pivotal figure in my life was devastating. Despite my demanding work schedule and the distance I made the drive to Portland every weekend to spend time with her, each visit I would sit by her hospital bed, and later at their home when she moved to hospice care. We talked about architecture, her garden plans she would never complete, and sometimes just sat in comfortable silence when she was too tired to speak. My grandfather would watch us with sad eyes, occasionally stepping out of the room when emotions overwhelmed him. Jessica, despite living only 15 minutes from our grandparents' home, visited sporadically. She always had excuses. The kids had activities, work was demanding, she was planning a fundraiser. When she did visit, it was brief, and she seemed uncomfortable with the reality of my grandmother's declining health. My parents visited more frequently, but their visits had a performative quality, as if they were fulfilling an obligation rather than spending precious final moments with a loved one. When my grandmother passed, I took a week off work to help my grandfather with funeral arrangements. The service was elegant and tasteful, just as she would have wanted. I gave a eulogy that had many attendees in tears, speaking about her quiet strength and unwavering support. My parents and Jessica sat in the front row, appropriately somber, but I could not help noticing how quickly they moved on to discussing estate matters in hushed tones at the reception afterward. My grandfather, usually stoic and reserved, seemed to withdraw further after the funeral. He and my grandmother had been married for 52 years, and her absence left a void that nothing could fill. While my parents encouraged him to consider moving to a retirement community, sell the family estate, and simplify his finances, I simply called him every few days to check in and listen. 6 months after my grandmother's passing, my grandfather's health began to decline rapidly. What started as fatigue and loss of appetite progressed to concerning symptoms that eventually led to a diagnosis of congestive heart failure. When I heard the news, I immediately arranged a leave of absence from work and temporarily relocated back to Portland. My boss, understanding the situation, agreed to let me work remotely on a reduced schedule so I could help care for my grandfather. Moving back into my grandparents' home was bittersweet. The house was filled with memories of my grandmother, from her collection of antique teacups to the garden visible from every window. My grandfather and I fell into a comfortable routine. I would help him with medication, prepare simple meals, and drive him to medical appointments. In the evenings, we would sit in his study, sometimes talking, sometimes just keeping each other company. Our conversations during this time took on a depth and honesty that had never been present before. My grandfather, perhaps sensing his own mortality, began to speak more openly about family dynamics that had previously been taboo topics. One evening, as we sat looking through old photo albums, he paused at a picture of me at about 10 years old, standing proudly next to a science fair project. I remembered that day clearly. I had won third place, but my parents had been unable to attend the award ceremony because they were at Jessica's dance recital. My grandfather looked at me with sad eyes and said, "Your grandmother and I always saw how hard you tried, Aaron. We saw what your parents could not." He turned the page to another photo, this one of me helping him build a birdhouse in his workshop. Some people value the wrong things in this life. They miss what is right in front of them. At the time, I thought he was simply reminiscing, but looking back, I realized he was preparing me for what was to come. He would occasionally make cryptic comments about making things right or ensuring fairness in the end. I attributed these remarks to his failing health and grief, never suspecting they had a concrete meaning. 3 months after I moved back to Portland, my grandfather passed peacefully in his sleep. Despite knowing his health was failing, the loss hit me hard. This man had been more of a father figure to me than my actual father in many ways, and now both of my strongest supporters were gone. The days following his death were a blur of funeral arrangements, receiving condolences, and beginning the overwhelming process of settling his estate. My parents took charge immediately, with my father declaring himself the natural point person, since he was the only child of my grandfather. The family gathered at my grandparents' home a week after the funeral. The attorney handling my grandfather's estate was scheduled to arrive that afternoon for the official reading of the will. The atmosphere was tense, with my parents and Jessica huddled together in frequent whispered conversations that would abruptly stop whenever I approached. While looking for a tie of my grandfather's that I wanted to wear to the will reading as a small tribute, I passed my father's temporary office set up in the guest room. The door was ajar, and documents were spread across the desk. I would have continued walking, but a glimpse of my name caught my attention. Against my better judgment, I stepped into the room and scanned the papers. What I found shook me to my core. There were printed emails between my parents and a lawyer I did not recognize, discussing strategies to contest my grandfather's will if necessary. They specifically mentioned concerns about any portions that might be left directly to me, with phrases like undue influence during his final months and questionable mental capacity following Martha's death. My hands trembling, I continued looking through the papers and found draft legal documents prepared to challenge any substantial bequest to me. There were talking points for my father to use, with the estate attorney emphasizing Jessica's children, her proximity to our grandparents, and her need for financial support as a mother of 2. As I stood there trying to process this betrayal, I heard my mother's voice in the hallway. I quickly moved away from the desk and pressed myself against the wall next to a tall bookcase, irrationally hoping to avoid detection in my grandparents' home. My mother and Jessica entered the room, unaware of my presence. "I am worried about the will reading," my mother said in a low voice. "Your father thinks everything will go smoothly. But what if William left Aaron more than we anticipated? He was living here those final months." Jessica's response froze the blood in my veins. "It does not matter what the will says. Dad has already talked to a lawyer about contesting anything that seems unfair. Aaron does not deserve an equal share. He may have swooped in at the end, but I am the one with children who could use college funds and a family to support." "Exactly," my mother agreed. "You have always been there for us." Aaron moved away and built his own life. This is what your grandparents would have wanted to see their legacy continue through your children. I slipped out of the room before they could discover me, my mind reeling. The family that had consistently placed me second was now actively plotting to ensure I remained in that position, even in my grandparents' absence. The inheritance itself meant less to me than this final confirmation that in my parents' eyes, I would always be worth less than my sister. 2 days before the official will reading, I received an unexpected call from someone named Daniel Williams, identifying himself as my grandfather's personal attorney. He requested a private meeting with me, specifying that I should not mention it to my parents or sister. Under normal circumstances, such secrecy would have made me uncomfortable, but after what I had discovered, I agreed without hesitation. We met at a small coffee shop downtown, far from my grandparents' neighborhood. Daniel Williams was an older man with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded me somewhat of my grandfather. After introducing himself as a longtime friend of my grandfather as well as his attorney, he got straight to the point. "Your grandfather suspected your family might try to manipulate his estate plan," he said, sliding a folder across the table. William was a shrewd businessman and an excellent judge of character. He observed your family dynamics for years and made arrangements accordingly. Inside the folder was documentation of a trust that had been established 5 years earlier, completely separate from the will that would be read to the family. The trust named me as the sole beneficiary. "Your grandparents created this trust when your grandmother was first diagnosed," Daniel explained. "They wanted to ensure their wishes would be carried out regardless of any family pressure or legal challenges." He then pulled out a tablet and played a video recording my grandfather had made just 2 months before his death. Seeing his face and hearing his voice so unexpectedly brought tears to my eyes. "Aaron," my grandfather began, his voice weaker than I remembered, but his eyes sharp and clear. "If you are watching this, then I am gone, and Daniel has determined it necessary to inform you of our arrangements before the family meeting. Your grandmother and I always saw how Thomas and Eleanor favored Jessica. We watched you grow up trying so hard to earn their approval, never quite receiving the recognition you deserved." He paused, seeming to gather strength. "We could not interfere in your parents' choices while raising you, but we can ensure fairness now. The family will be told that the estate is to be divided with the house and half of our liquid assets split between your parents and Jessica. What they will not know until the formal reading is that our investment portfolio, which is worth more than twice the value of those assets, has been placed in an irrevocable trust for you years ago." My grandfather's eyes seemed to look directly into mine as he continued. "This is not about loving one grandchild more than another. This is about balance and fairness. You have worked for everything you have, while Jessica has had advantages handed to her throughout her life. Your grandmother and I believe this evens the scales somewhat." The video continued with my grandfather explaining that the trust was structured to be completely protected from legal challenges. He had included a provision in his will that anyone who contested any part of it would forfeit their entire share. He knew my parents well enough to know they would not risk losing everything. "Be wise with this gift," my grandfather concluded. "Your grandmother and I are proud of the man you have become, despite the challenges you have faced. We love you, Aaron." The video ended, and I sat in stunned silence. Daniel allowed me time to process before explaining the practical details. The trust contained not only financial assets, but also ownership interests in my grandfather's real estate holdings. The total value was substantial enough to pay off my student loans many times over and provide financial security I had never imagined. "Your grandfather also recorded a message for the entire family," Daniel added. "That one will be played at the official reading. He wanted to make certain there would be no misunderstandings about his intentions." I left that meeting with mixed emotions. The validation that my grandparents had seen and understood the family dynamics was profoundly healing. However, I dreaded the family confrontation that would inevitably follow the will reading. Part of me wanted to confront my parents immediately about their plans to contest the will, but Daniel advised waiting until the official reading. On the day of the will reading, the family gathered in Daniel's office. My father sat with confident authority, my mother beside him with a solemn expression that did not quite reach her eyes. Jessica sat with her husband, occasionally glancing at me with what almost seemed like pity. They had no idea what was coming. Daniel began with standard legal formalities, then outlined the distribution of the house and liquid assets, just as my grandfather had described in his private message to me. My father nodded in satisfaction, and Jessica relaxed visibly in her chair. Then Daniel cleared his throat and continued. "In addition, William established an irrevocable trust 5 years ago, containing his investment portfolio and business interests. This trust names Aaron as the sole beneficiary." The silence in the room was absolute. My father's face flushed dark red while my mother's mouth opened in shock. Jessica was the first to break the silence. "What? That cannot be right." Aaron barely even visited them until Grandma got sick, she exclaimed, looking to our parents for support. My father turned to Daniel, his voice tight with controlled anger. This seems highly suspicious. My father was in declining health after my mother passed. We will need to review his mental competency. At the time this trust was supposedly created, Daniel remained completely calm. I anticipated this response, which is why William prepared a video statement to be played at this meeting. Before I play it, I should point out that the will contains a no contest clause. Any legal challenge to any portion of William's estate plan will result in the challenger forfeiting their entire inheritance. He turned on a large screen mounted on the wall and played the video. My grandfather appeared sitting in his study, looking directly into the camera. The recording had been made more recently than the one I had seen privately, perhaps just weeks before his death. My dear family, he began, his voice surprisingly strong. If you are viewing this, then I have passed on to join my beloved Martha. I want to explain my decisions regarding my estate personally, so there can be no misunderstandings or accusations. He addressed my parents first. Thomas and Eleanor, your favoritism has not gone unnoticed. I have watched you diminish Aaron his entire life, while placing Jessica on a pedestal. As parents, that was your choice to make, however misguided I found it. As a grandfather, it is my choice to create balance where I see inequality. Jessica shifted uncomfortably as my grandfather continued. Jessica, you have been given advantages throughout your life. Your parents funded your education fully, while Aaron graduated with substantial debt. They have supported your career and family consistently. You have been loved demonstrably and publicly, and that is a gift in itself. Then my grandfather's gaze seemed to find me through the screen. Aaron, you have shown remarkable resilience. You have built a life and career with minimal support, never complaining about the inequity you faced. The trust I established for you represents not only your grandmother's and my financial legacy, but our recognition of your character and perseverance. He concluded by addressing the entire family again. This distribution may not seem equal on its face, but it is equitable when viewed in the context of a lifetime of imbalance. I hope you will accept my decision with grace and perhaps reflection. My deepest wish is that this brings closure rather than further division. When the video ended, Jessica's husband was staring at the floor, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before him. My father was consulting quietly with my mother, both wearing expressions of barely contained rage. My father turned to his own lawyer, who had accompanied them to the reading. Is there anything we can do? He asked in a stage whisper that everyone could hear. The lawyer shook his head slightly. The trust was established years ago when William was in good health. It is irrevocable and properly executed. Challenging it would almost certainly be unsuccessful and would trigger the no contest clause, resulting in you losing the house and other assets as well. Jessica stood up suddenly, tears in her eyes. This is not fair. We have children to think about. College funds their future. Aaron does not even have a family. I finally spoke, keeping my voice level despite the emotions churning inside me. This is not about the money, Jessica. This is about acknowledging that I mattered too. Grandpa wanted to make things right. You should share it with us, she insisted, looking to our parents for support. For the sake of family harmony. Family harmony, I repeated, unable to hide my disbelief. Where was the concern for family harmony when I was growing up, feeling like an outsider in my own home? Where was it when you were planning to contest the will to make sure I got nothing? The shocked expressions told me they had not realized I knew about their plans. The meeting dissolved shortly after, with my parents and Jessica leaving in cold anger while I remained behind to discuss practical matters with Daniel. The months following the will reading were some of the most transformative of my life. With my inheritance, I paid off my student loans and made thoughtful investments for my future. More importantly, I established a scholarship fund in my grandparents' names, specifically designed for overlooked students who showed promise and determination, but lacked family support. For the first 6 months, there was no contact between me and my immediate family. I focused on healing, processing not only my grief over losing my grandparents, but also coming to terms with the reality of my family relationships. I returned to Seattle, and my architecture career, now financially secure, but still passionate about creating meaningful spaces, The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. I received a text from Jessica, asking if we could talk. We met at a neutral location, a park, halfway between Portland and Seattle. She had come alone without her husband or our parents' knowledge. The conversation was difficult at first, filled with awkward silences and careful wording. But eventually, Jessica said something that surprised me. I never realized how differently we were treated until Grandpa laid it all out, she admitted, staring at the lake before us rather than meeting my eyes. It was like suddenly seeing our childhood through completely different lenses. Mom and Dad always made it seem normal, and I just accepted the narrative. I did not immediately respond, letting her continue her thought process aloud. I kept thinking about specific moments growing up, like when you won that regional art competition in high school, and instead of celebrating, Mom and Dad just asked why you were wasting time on art instead of focusing on more practical subjects. She shook her head. But when I decided to take a photography elective, they bought me an expensive camera and framed my first decent photo. This acknowledgement, small as it might seem to an outsider, was monumental coming from Jessica. For the first time, she was seeing our shared history without the filter our parents had created. It was the beginning of a more honest relationship between us. My parents took longer to reach out. My mother called about 8 months after the will, reading her voice stiff and formal. The conversation was brief and painfully awkward, culminating in what passed for an apology in our family. "I never meant to make you feel less loved," she said, though the passive construction of not taking direct responsibility was telling. "We just thought Jessica needed more attention." My father still struggled to acknowledge his role in the family dynamics. When we eventually spoke nearly a year after my grandfather's passing, he focused entirely on practical matters regarding the estate, avoiding any mention of the revelations or his own behavior. It was clear he felt justified in his treatment of me, and viewed my inheritance as my grandfather's mistake, rather than a correction of injustice. The healing process was not linear. I worked with a therapist who specialized in family trauma, gradually processing the childhood experiences of feeling unwanted and less worthy. The most profound realization was that I had spent my entire life trying to earn love that should have been freely given, measuring my worth through my parents' conditional approval. What brought me the most peace was knowing my grandparents had truly seen me. Their gift was not just financial security, but validation, that my experiences were real, and that I deserved better. Through their actions, they taught me my final and most valuable lesson, that sometimes the people who should love you the most fail to see your worth, and that does not diminish who you are. A year and a half after my grandfather's death, we attempted a family gathering for Thanksgiving. The atmosphere was strained with undercurrents of resentment, still evident in my father's behavior and my mother's overly careful conversation. Jessica and I, however, had developed a more authentic relationship, acknowledging the past while trying to build something healthier for the future. The experience shaped my approach to all relationships. I became more intentional about treating people with equality and fairness, particularly sensitive to those who might feel overlooked or undervalued. In my professional life, I advocated for junior architects whose contributions might otherwise be missed, remembering how it felt to have my efforts dismissed. The true nature of inheritance, I realized, extends far beyond money. My grandparents left me their values, their recognition of injustice, and their courage to address it. They taught me that standing up for fairness might cause conflict, but was necessary for genuine healing. Most importantly, they showed me that it is possible to respond to unfairness with wisdom, rather than bitterness. Today, when people ask about my family, I can answer with honesty, but without the raw pain that once accompanied those discussions. The inheritance provided financial freedom, but the real gift was the freedom to define my own worth, independent of my parents' assessments. That is a legacy far more valuable than any trust fund. Has your family ever treated you unfairly or shown favoritism that hurt you deeply? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most valuable inheritance is not money but the wisdom to recognize your own worth.